Dr. Jeff Lehmkuhler, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist from the University of Kentucky, and I'm bringing you another episode of Beef Minutes. This week we've got a group of calves that just came in today behind me. This is part of the project that we're doing for backgrounding calves with ASC 406 Beef Science class, but I thought it would be a good time to discuss some of the weaning considerations as we move into the fall here, getting into late September and in October. A couple of things to consider is making sure that you've gone ahead and received your vaccinations if you're going to vaccinate these calves both prior to weaning, which is what we would recommend. Get that first dose in about 2 weeks before you intend to wean so that you can booster then if need be at weaning time, lower the stress on those calves. Also, go ahead and consider getting your processing done on those calves. If you have calves that still need castrated, consider castrating those calves before you would wean those so that they can go back with their dams and release a little bit of that stress compared to castrating them and putting them in a new environment, a new field or new pen without their dams. Also, as we think about getting ready to wean calves, make sure we check our weaning pen or our facilities. We've got calves that are going to want to get back to their dams, and so walking the fence lines, make sure that they're still good, check for any broken boards, make sure that you've got pens with gates over them. I'll give you an example here where we've got these gates over the feed bunks so that calves maybe want to try and slip through that feed bunk are going to get stopped. Also, think about making sure that you've got a good clean water source for these calves. If you're using some type of frost free type of fountain like what we have in these pens, be sure to go ahead and either remove the balls or push the ball down and lock them down. Sometimes these calves don't know how to use those drinkers, and so by making sure that we've got those balls out or pushed down, the calves can get to water easily until they learn how to use those waters. Typically, we'd like to try to keep them on a similar feed that they were coming from as possible. Ideally, we would use the fence line weaning system where we would have calves that are with their cows on pasture. Simply move the cows to the other side of the fence. Make sure it's a good strong fence that maybe woven wire is going to be the ideal situation for that nose-to-nose contact. We have tried to use some electric fencing, and it can be done, but realize that some of those determined calves may slip through electric fence to get back with their dams. So inspect the fence, but if you can leave those calves out there on pasture, you'll see that they will overcome weaning very easily and with minimal stress, and performance will be maintained during that period of time. If you are weaning and moving them into a facility, something like this, be sure that you go ahead and have some free choice hay that's high quality, usually like a second or third cutting grass hay is ideal. That's got soft leaves and very little stem to no stem. A little bit of legume is fine. We do not want to have a really high percentage of legumes because sometimes with excess protein intake we can get protein down to the large intestine that can cause a little bit of scouring or diarrhea. And when these calves are walking the pens and balling and maybe not drinking a lot of water to begin with, we don't want to cause them to even dehydrate further by inducing diarrhea by excessive protein intake. For weaning rations, typically somewhere around a 14 to 16% crude protein for the total diet is what we would be targeting. You can go up a little bit higher. For instance, 18% would be acceptable if you knew that the calves were going to have a relatively low intake, but in my experience, if we stay around that 14 to 16% and minimize the stress and get these calves up on feed as quickly as we can, then you don't need the higher nutrient-dense type of feeds, and they will turn around and do just fine. It's all about managing the risk and the stress risk on these calves. And so the other component of this, as we think about moving into this weaning period, also be thinking about checking the calves frequently, a couple times a day. The earlier that you can capture calves that might be getting a little bit sick and getting a temperature on them and checking if they're 104 or higher, the quicker you can get them treated for respiratory disease or any other illness that they may have. When we're starting these calves on feed, generally I would recommend starting them out with that grass hay and maybe 3/4% of body weight of a good grain mix that's highly palatable. And within the first couple of days, you're trying to encourage them to go in to eat that grain. You might think about putting your feed troughs so that they've got to walk around them, particularly if you're doing some fence line weaning and they're walking back and forth along that fence line. Simply put your feed bunk perpendicular to the fence line, and those calves will walk to that. Then they'll put their head down, see what's in it before they walk around and continue, and that will just continue to encourage them to eat. If you have creep fed calves, go ahead and consider using that creep feed as kind of that starter for the first couple days. Again, you're just trying to kind of manage stressors and manage that risk, and so we are trying to transition them as easily as we can, and having familiar feeds will just help them during that transition process and removing them from their cows. Also, as you begin going through, make sure you check them every day. A couple times a day, and look for calves that maybe aren't as aggressive. You may have to encourage them to come up to the feed bunk when you put grain in there, and if they're not wanting to come up, see if they've got some signs of depression or droopy ears, watery eyes, maybe a little nasal discharge, and take them to the chute and get a temp on them and see if they've got something going on from a sickness standpoint. Watch for dark bloody scours, which would be an indication of coccidiosis. During the periods of stress, it's not uncommon to see calves maybe break with coccidiosis, and so we might want to consider using a preventative such as an ionophore, or if you do have coccidiosis, you'll need to treat that and maybe use something like an Amprolium type product and get those calves cleaned up with cocci under control. And then lastly, think about target gains depending on the time frame that you're going to market them. If you're wanting to just think about weaning them and then marketing them, typically they get through the weaning process in about 3 to 4 days if it's low stress. In some situations it may take just a little bit longer than that. Also then, if we get calves that typically are going to get sick from stress, they're usually going to break within about 6 to 8 days, and so you might want to hold them at least 2 to 3 weeks just to think about getting them through that period and transition them, get the vaccines working and building up their immunity so that when they do go to that next step, they're ready to go and they can handle the pathogens that they may be exposed to and have that immunity built up from that second dose if need be. Also, be sure to go ahead and think about deworming. A lot of times we forget about the deworming process, but the most susceptible calves to internal parasites are the lighter calves, and so when we've got young lightweight calves like this, it would be a good timing to go ahead and get them dewormed and get them cleaned up so that your vaccines will work more efficiently and those calves aren't going to be burdened by internal parasites and be able to absorb the nutrients from the feed that they're consuming as well. So that's just been a quick little kind of reminder on getting ready for weaning. I hope everything goes well for you this year, and I hope the weaning process goes smoothly and that your calves top the market. This has been this week's Beef Minutes. Again, I'm Dr. Jeff Lehmkuhler, Extension Beef Cattle Specialist at the University of Kentucky. We look forward to hearing from you soon.